Today on Market Journal, analyst Elaine Kub will join us to discuss all things crops. We'll run through the markets and get her opinion on the ag news that's been happening in D.C. And who here asked for a volunteer? If left untreated, volunteer corn can hurt your bottom line when the end of the season comes. We'll head to the field to see what researchers are doing to prevent the arrival of this unwanted guest. Plus, when one type of livestock doesn't cut it, some ranchers turn to multi-species grazing. Could this century-old way of pasture management be what your farm is looking for? And speaking of grazing, have you checked your forage lately? We'll give you some tips on what you can do to keep your animals and your land happy and healthy. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We are into the month of September now, moving right along. Hope everybody had a wonderful Labor Day, and I hope you've been staying dry. It's been rainy for sure. It's about 2 weeks out now from the first day of fall, and before you know it, it's going to be holiday season right around the corner. And this time of year means harvest time is getting closer. Let's take a look at our latest crop progress report. USDA says the nation's corn crop is 67% good to excellent, and that's 1% down from last week's report. And get this, 22% of the corn has matured, and that's double the number from the crop's 5-year average. Now, as we move on to soybeans, things look to be remaining steady as far as that crop is concerned. Producers reporting the crop 66% good to excellent, and that's equal to last week. 16% of the soybean crop is dropping leaves, and that's above the 5-year average, which is 9%. And as far as spring wheat is concerned, 87% of that crop has been harvested. That's also above the 5-year average, which is 75%. If we look at things by state, Nebraska leads the way with 81% of the overall crop rated good to excellent. Illinois and Iowa, they're at 75 and 74% respectively, so not too far behind when you look at things from a state-by-state basis. We're joined today by market analyst Elaine Kub. She's also written the book, Mastering the Grain Markets, How Profits Are Really Made. She's going to help us make sense of some of the latest numbers in the new crop report. Elaine, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for the invite.
Now, before you help us break down some of the market numbers, let's talk a bit about the big news from last week. Tariffs and trade wars have been dominating a lot of the news. And we got word the Agriculture Department will be paying money to some producers hit especially hard. So who's included on that list, and what are your thoughts on how it may impact certain producers?
Well, receiving checks from the government is not the way that profits are made, right? The big winners of that program are soybean producers. The program is $1.65 per bushel for soybeans, but only on 50% of the bushels, so that's really not $1.65, that's now 82.5 cents per bushel for soybeans. Like a penny for corn, 14 cents for wheat, so there has been some pushback on that, but it really is more justified for the soybeans than the corn. If you look at actual corn prices right now, the National Corn Index, which is an average of cash bids collected by DTN, that's $3.24 right now, and last September at this time it was more like $3 even. So it kind of makes sense that some of those commodities got left out, and the soybeans were the big beneficiary of that government program.
And as for the markets, the latest crop progress report came out. What were some of your big takeaways from that? Any surprises with the report?
Well, no. I mean, this is the time of year when the crop is pretty well made. The row crop is pretty well made. And we did see those condition ratings pretty much steady for corn and soybeans. We did, however, see an improvement in the condition ratings for the pastures and range. So that suggests to me that like this rain that we have been receiving, especially in the southern plains where they really need it, that has benefited those areas that can still benefit from it.
So let's dig a little more into those numbers. Which ones in particular stuck out to you?
Yeah, not just the condition ratings, but the progress of it. And this has been true all summer. Things are just moving really, really fast. The USDA said 22% nationwide of the corn crop is already mature, compared to an average this time of year of only 11%. So we're going to see that continue to be reflected in faster than usual harvest progress paces. Texas is already over half done. It's coming up through Kentucky, through Arkansas, 30% done. So things are going to be happening fast, and so the weather now really affects that harvest outlook.
Yeah, we'll get more into the weather in a second, but I did want to touch on the wheat market. Things have been pretty volatile for wheat producers. Do you see any cause for concern with that, or do you think things have started to settle down?
I wouldn't be too concerned about it. The big concern last week was that Russia might limit their exports, but that turned out to be just a rumor. So we had a sell-off after that. So I think the peak panic in the wheat market was in early August, and now that peak panic is over, and now we might just bounce along. And the prospect would be in the U.S. wheat market for basis prices to improve as we go forward.
And let's go back to the weather. You touched on that briefly. Many parts of the country dealing with storms this week, and that could help soybean producers. But what about the corn producers who are looking at that early harvest?
Yeah, this rain right now is not really helpful, especially as it's coming up through the Gulf, these Gulf storms. That's not great for cotton harvest. Cotton prices really aren't responding to that. And that's sort of the story throughout the commodity markets, is we're probably not going to see prices respond, but it's going to make harvest more challenging. You've got folks cutting silage right now all through the Corn Belt. Rain right now just makes everything more challenging, but probably won't affect prices.
Right. I know cotton farmers definitely paying attention to what Tropical Storm Gordon is doing. What other disruptions do you think could result?
Yeah, ordinarily when you get tropical storms like this in the Gulf, you start to really worry about the SIF barge shipping lanes, getting soybeans to the market effectively. But right now, since we don't have a lot of export business on the books, that may not be as big of a story in 2018 as it would be in other years.
Yeah, and even with all the recent crazy weather, it looks like a good bet that the crop supply is going to be pretty strong, maybe a little too strong when you think about where all this inventory is going to go. So with all the trade disputes, how do you see this ending?
I do not see it ending well. I see it ending in a lot of big open piles across the Corn Belt. We've got very large futures spreads for corn, like 12 cents from harvest to March. For soybeans, it's like 25 cents of carry from harvest, carrying it through March. So obviously all of the elevators and commercial grain companies are going to store as many beans as they can, hopefully ship out a little more corn than usual for this time of year. But farmers too really need to be thinking about where can they store this grain and keep it off the market.
And to wrap things up, what's your outlook as we head into fall? Any advice for farmers?
Yeah, just store that grain. For years I've been bullish about building bins because we know this country can grow very large crops or grow large inventories of crops. So it's a little bit late to be building bins for the 2018 harvest, but if you can figure out ways to put this grain in bags, soybeans in bags, if you've got maybe even an old machine shed that you could convert into flat storage, honestly, any sort of grain storage is going to be very important in these next few months.
Elaine Kub, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Troy.
Good to talk to you. Store that grain. Words of wisdom from Elaine Kub. She's our analyst this week. And next week, we'll be joined by agricultural economist Dr. Chad Hart. He's from Iowa State University, and he'll give his take on the latest happenings in the agricultural world. If you have a question that you'd like for me to ask Chad, just email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along to him during the interview. Now, nobody likes an uninvited guest. Now, just imagine you're looking out at a beautiful soybean field, and you notice a random stalk. Oh no, you've got volunteer corn, and it can cause a mess for your land and your bottom line. Now a group of scientists from the University of Nebraska is finding a new way to keep plants you don't want out of your field. Market Journal's Brad Mills has the story.
Farmers are used to dealing with weeds in their fields, But when something like volunteer corn emerges, it can present a host of new issues.
So volunteer corn is a problem weed every year in soybean as well as in corn, because our cropping system in Nebraska is corn and soybean, at least in eastern part of the state.
That's right. It's not just restricted to cornfields and may compete with smaller crops for moisture, nutrients, and light. Additionally, it can attract pests and introduce diseases that could remain present into future growing years. Volunteer corn can appear as a result of storms, wind scattering, or when kernels are dropped or lost during the previous year's harvest. Some volunteer corn is also a product of chemical-resistant hybrid corn, which is found in many fields. So killing it like you would a regular weed isn't an option.
Volunteer corn is also coming from the hybrid corn, so it is also resistant to glyphosate or glufosinate, depending on which hybrid was planted last year. So basically, there is no selective herbicide that can selectively control volunteer corn, but can be selective to hybrid corn.
But the researchers are hoping to change that and are conducting a project to test certain herbicides with a new corn variety.
So this project particularly is about using enlist corn, which is a new corn variety, came to the market this year. So that enlist corn is resistant to 2,4-D glyphosate, as well as a part of grass herbicide known as FOPs. For example, this Azure 2 is the herbicide which is labeled you can apply in enlist corn. Means it's just a group of grass herbicides that is this enlist corn is tolerant to, and so you can use the another group of herbicide that can effectively control volunteer corn. And enlist corn will not be affected by this Azure 2 herbicide, but volunteer corn, it could be resistant to glyphosate as well as glufosinate. It will be killed by applying Azure 2 herbicide, which is fluazepop based herbicide.
If volunteer corn is a problem for you, it may be easier to eradicate if you have a soybean field that has been compromised.
So volunteer corn can emerge in any crop basically, but it's up to the field where that field was rotated with corn or soybean. In soybean, there are at least 5 or 6 good grass herbicides that you can use, and it can selectively control volunteer corn, and there will not be any injury on soybean. Because soybean is a broadleaf crop, and so there are some grass herbicides that can easily and effectively control volunteer corn.
As you gear up for next season, Dr. Jhala has some advice.
So for those growers, if they are planting enlist corn this year, I recommend to go for soybean next year, where you can still use DIM type of grass herbicides. For example, Select-Max, Post. These are some herbicide options that you can still apply in soybean, and you can kill enlist volunteer corn.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Brad Mills.
And we've posted some additional tips for combating volunteer corn on social media. Head over to the Market Journal Facebook page and check it out. A farm management practice doesn't have to be new in order to be successful. We all know that. In fact, homesteaders from 100 years ago or more were using various species of livestock to keep their pastures in order and put food on the table for their families. Now other ranchers are taking their lead and learning that livestock diversity can be key when it comes to maintaining a healthy farm. It's a concept that's as old as the farm itself. Multispecies grazing uses different animals to target different areas of your land, with the goal of making the best use of the pasture and the animals on it.
Greater than 90% of America's industry for a long time was agriculture, and so everybody had a little herd of pigs, even sheep and goats and cattle and all these different forms of protein for meat and for milk and for fur and for fiber. And so it's been a big part of agriculture as long as humanity has existed. It's only been in the past 100 years where people have been able to really focus on raising any one species.
Ranchers like Sage Askin see the benefits in relying on more than one type of livestock. He's been employing the idea of multi-species grazing for 4 years on ranches in Wyoming and Montana. He says the key to being successful is finding the right mix of animals and available forage.
The components of multi-species grazing, just at the most basic level, for us is that we have cattle that usually most people already have on a ranch. and then on the ranches that we lease, we might run cattle, and then we'll bring in sheep that will run before or after the cattle, sometimes with the cattle. And we also have goats if we have a browse component on that ranch. And so we just try to adapt the livestock to the resource, the forage resource that's available. So if there's a lot of browse, if there's a lot of brush and things like that, we start thinking more towards having some more goats on that operation.
The proper planning and understanding what different animals offer can pay off in terms of monetary gain and environmental sustainability.
The benefits of multi-species grazing for us have been twofold: ecological and economic benefits. On a pound-for-pound basis, meaning that for every pound of body weight of animal on the range, a little critter such as a sheep and a goat will be more profitable than a bigger critter such as a cow. Now, from an ecological perspective, the various forage base that's often available to us all across the United States has various components of browse plants and grazing plants. And so we believe that extensive use of just grazing plants, like with cattle, for year after year after year, creates a shrubland that is not being grazed or used in any way. So by browsing that back and with an equal mix of sheep and goats, we're able to get a very good pasture mix of species that actually fits the range. So it's a bottoms up, from the ground up approach to management on a ranch.
There's a lot to consider when deciding if multi-species grazing is right for you. You'll need to plan for extra fencing, additional vet care, security from predators, interspecies personality conflicts, and more.
There will be people that are antagonistic towards having sheep and goats who haven't just been used to it. It's not their own fault. And so that can be a disadvantage. Another disadvantage can be having to go out and find markets to sell those livestock that you might not be used to selling. As well, the environmental impacts. Both sheep and goats are a little tougher to winter, to carry through the winter in our tough, rugged Wyoming winters. And so that's a bit of a learning curve. Lastly, you know, all of it is just a new thing. In essence, it requires a bit of a learning curve. Any new thing you do requires learning new ideas, new options, and that's probably the biggest thing. Is it's very challenging to learn something new.
If you'd like more information about multi-species grazing, Sage says you can contact him through his website. That address is askinlandandlivestock.com. And when your animals want that snack, they can't go online and order a pizza, so you've got to be the one to provide them with something to eat. That's where Forage comes in. In addition to giving your animals nutrition, forages contribute to the overall health of the ecosystem. It's also good for the land to change it up by growing alternative forages. We spoke with University of Nebraska agronomist Dr. Daren Redfearn to learn more about alternative forages and how you can introduce different types into your pasture.
So when we talk about alternative forages, that's more or less just a fancy name for annual forages. However, I think some of the differences when we think about alternative forages is we're thinking about them, the annual forages is planted for a specific purpose. That purpose could be as a cover crop after a grain crop that they'll be grazing. One of the other instances where we see these alternative forages planted often is after a drought. So the decisions about alternative forages get down to basically 2 or 3 main decisions. The primary decision is what season will you be growing them. And by season, we're talking about whether we're planting them in the summer, whether we're planting them in the fall, or whether we're planting them in the spring. Typically, we look at the cool seasons during the fall and during the spring when the temperatures are a little bit cooler. The summer annual forages typically then would be planted in the summer. What we also see during that period of time is that a lot of times the growing season for these alternative forages is very short. Oftentimes 60 days for a lot of them. Long growing season might be 75 or as many as 90. So the advantages and disadvantages of the alternative forages, many times these alternative forages are planted in mixtures. These are often referred to as diverse mixtures or complex mixtures, where we're talking about some combination of grasses, legumes, maybe some broadleaf plants such as turnips. Additionally, we may see a mixture of both the warm seasons and the cool seasons together. Pretty much regardless of what we're seeing with these mixtures is that grasses will dominate the mixtures. Grasses are just super competitive both with the legumes and also the broadleaves. One of the things that we do see is when we include some of the brassicas in with cool season grasses, that they will comprise 25 to 30% of that mixture. It's relatively easy to introduce the alternative forages into the mixtures because a lot of them are forages that we've had around for years and years and years. So we know a lot about the agronomic management of these. What we don't know is how they perform in the mixture. So the easiest thing to incorporate them is that whatever the species is that comprises the majority of the mixture, that's the one that we should focus on for the primary management. Yeah, so for more information on this, the easiest place to go is going to be the beef.unl.edu website. Several articles on there that have been written addressing the establishment, and also some on the grazing management of alternative forages.
Experts suggest that if you're looking for a high-protein forage, you may want to give alfalfa a shot. And if growing legumes is a problem for you, try your hand with a grass. Some types would include timothy grass, fescue, or orchard grass. And no matter the forage you choose, you're encouraged to find something that meets your livestock's nutritional needs, keeps the soil healthy, and meets your economical needs. For Tim Engelhart, 2017 was a rough first year at growing yellow field peas. He struggled with challenges associated with seeding peas, resulting in reduced stands, poor nodulation, and higher weed pressure. But those challenges didn't stop him from coming back and planting 150 acres of peas in 2018 on his farm near Bladen. Engelhart first heard about field peas through Bladen-based Green Cover Seed, where he buys his cover crop seed. And with the help of local experts like Nebraska Extension educator Strahinja Stepanovich, he's continually fine-tuning his management of the crop. Read about Engelhart's takeaways from 2 years of growing field peas in the September Nebraska Farmer. It's now time for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, temperatures have been cooler this week, but the big story has been all the rain. Are we expecting another round of showers and storms anytime soon?
Well, Troy, it does appear that we have seen most of the heaviest precipitation move to the east of us. We still got some scattered precipitation chances this weekend, but overall a fairly dry forecast, and that's really especially helpful after the heavy precipitation that we received from Saturday through Thursday across south central, southeast, and east central Nebraska. 44 of our cocoa raw stations, or what we consider the anti-rain network, showed accumulations for the period greater than 6 inches, with a dozen of the stations greater than 7 inches. Kind of reminds me of what we went through during the summer of 1993 when we had the excessive rainfall. The farther north and west you got, the less the precipitation totals came in, and in fact the northwestern half of the panhandle basically came out precipitation free. So the areas that needed the precipitation got it, and the areas that didn't need it didn't get it, and that's about the best we can hope for. Got a halfway decent start on soil moisture recharge, but it's going to cause some some harvest delay issues until we get things dried out, and it does appear that this week may actually help with that process. So as we go to the upper air models, what we are going to notice is we do have more of a zonal flow. What's left of the remnants of Gordon is now going to move to the east, and we do have some weak waves that will move to the atmosphere that might generate some precipitation, but mostly it's going to be a dry forecast with an a surface low up in the western Dakotas. Most of the precipitation will be associated with Gordon as its remnants move off to the east, and that'll cough the flow. We might see just a scattering of precipitation in southeast Nebraska, but overall dry conditions. And that trough kind of moves toward the east. We do show low pressure at the surface on Sunday in western portions of the state. Models are indicating, at least at GFS, a slight chance of precipitation, but to be honest with you, I don't think we're going to see much moisture return into the region to enhance precipitation. So by Monday, another trough moves to the east. We're basically in that zonal flow. We do not have much in the way of any significant area of moisture convergence. So again, most of the precipitation lays to our east. Ridge builds in and warmth returns, and we earnestly start to get into a drier forecast. Surface lows up in the Dakotas and eastern Montana do indicate that there's the potential for precipitation light across the Dakotas. But again, heavy precipitation along the eastern seaboard, dry in the interior. And then as we get into Wednesday, we see that trough trying to move a little bit closer to us. Again, a surface low in the Dakotas, but that will be the concentrated area of precipitation, if any does occur. And most of it will be well up along the Canadian border, with the remnants of Gordon and that trough finally pushing off the eastern seaboard. We start to turn our attentions to the trough in the western United States, making its way toward our region. We start to see Thursday surface lows being indicated developing in south central Kansas and in the western Dakotas. But again, moisture feed northward is going to be slow with this system. It's probably going to take a couple days, and it'll really rely on this trough getting a little bit closer on Friday before the high pressure system starts to push moisture up into our region. So we see surface lows again as we get into western Kansas and the western Dakotas, and we start to see that surge of moisture and start to interact with that front, which is poised to come through as we get into late Friday and into the day on Sunday. But even this does not look to have a great deal of moisture with us. So as we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast with that trough in the west, from next Thursday to the following Tuesday, the warmth does continue. We will be consistently in the 80s. And in terms of precipitation, the advance of this trough that's going to be slow moving, we will see an area below normal precipitation across a good portion of the Corn Belt.
Thanks, Al. You'll want to be sure you tune in to Market Journal next week. Husker Harvest Days is an annual event that showcases the latest in agricultural equipment, tools, and technology. We'll be there to see what has people talking this year. Plus, we'll be joined by a special guest all the way from the land of the rising sun. Iko Kabashima is the governor of Kumamoto Prefecture in Japan. He has strong ties to agriculture and the University of Nebraska. He'll be stopping by to share his amazing story and his thoughts on a changing agricultural landscape. That's all next time on Market Journal. All of today's stories are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. And keep up to date with the latest in agricultural news by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While you're there, be sure to join in on the conversation right along with us and let us know what's important to you and what stories you want to see on Market Journal. Who knows, we may even come and interview you. That's going to do it for this week's show. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.